Hello, and welcome to another installment of Leninhawk Talk. I am David Leninhawk, and this is my podcasty type show that I do where I ramble in a way that doesn't require me to be on camera. I'm recording this on November 1st, so spooky season is unfortunately over, but I want to talk about something I did over Halloween weekend, which was attending the Dismember the Alamo horror movie marathon. I've mentioned this in probably some other videos, but in 2019, I went to my first of these Dismember the Alamo marathons. I don't know if they had it at my local Alamo at any time before that, but this is 3 years ago, and it's basically an all-day movie marathon. Well, it's supposed to be all day. But it was 8 hours back in 2019, and it's 4 movies. They're horror movies, and they don't tell you what the movies are going to be beforehand. You only find out what the movie is just before they start it. And that's for each individual movie, and it's 4 movies. I think some locations actually go up to 5, but as far as I know, most locations for Alamo are at 4. So in 2019, this was a super fun experience. It started at noon. It didn't end until like 8 p.m., there was like some introductory hosting and comedy by Josh from Lunch Meat VHS, who unfortunately does not work at my local Alamo anymore. I think that was due to the COVID shutdown and then the bankruptcy, so all that stuff. And his presence was sorely missed, though we did still have Skip from AV Geeks this year. I believe he was also part of the 2019. I remember being there, and he's done some other stuff. I think he was there for one of the Oscar nights that I went to watch the Oscars at Alamo and stuff. And I believe he's the party most responsible for having them open an Alamo at my location. So a very nice guy, though. I always like seeing his stuff. But in 2019, they hosted. Josh was dressed up like a vampire. They did some comedy. They did like a costume contest, and they did a Can You Scream If You Have Rabies contest using these Zotz candies that foam up when you suck on them. So there was those contests. When we came in to that screening, all of the servers were dressed in like medical jackets themed for the first movie. So some of the times the servers like had costume changes involved. There were different props that were placed on the desks between movies, because after each movie they would stop, have us leave the auditorium for like 15 minutes so you could stretch your legs, go to the restroom, that sort of thing. And then we'd come back and there'd be a bunch of different props, and they gave you like a little bag that you could keep all your props in if you wanted to take them home. And they're mostly like, chintzy, like dollar store type props. I remember there was a pen with the logo from the keloid clinic from Cronenberg's Rabid, which ended up being one of the movies. And there was a plastic severed finger because Phantasm was one of the movies, that sort of thing. But it was fun to get all of these like chintzy things. Then you got a patch, because apparently patches are a big thing. There was a Dismember the Alamo t-shirt that didn't come with the ticket, but you could buy it extra, so I bought the Dismember the Alamo shirt at the time. There was just a lot of bells and whistles involved. And then the movie choices were really good in 2019. The first movie was The Abominable Dr. Phibes, the Vincent Price movie, and they actually showed a 35mm print. That's always exciting these days when a theater is showing 35, because unless you live near the New Beverly in Los Angeles, not many theaters show 35 anymore. And Alamo hasn't done a 35, I don't think, since COVID, which is a shame. But I mean, not everyone knows how to be a projectionist for that stuff. It's a very niche skill. But so that was the first movie. The second movie was Centipede Horror, which I had never even heard of before, but was a really fun movie. I know Error 444 is putting out a Blu-ray of it that I pre-ordered. I don't know when that ships, but I really enjoyed that. And there was like a necklace and some props that came with that too. They even put like some little like dried crickets or bugs or whatever, and like a little like one of those like tiny little Dixie cups or whatever that people put medicine in at hospitals. I'm not sure how many people actually ate them or not. I think it was mostly there for a joke. And then the third movie was Cronenberg's Rabid, which I had seen before, but it's Cronenberg on the big screen, so I'm not going to complain there. And then the last movie was Phantasm. I remember when they made us leave the auditorium and come back in for Phantasm, they had 2 of those like silver chrome poles that they usually put like velvet rope attached to, and they put those on the side of the entranceway because that's similar to the gate to the other like Tall Man's Planet or whatever from Phantasm. And A lot of people love the Phantasm movies. They're really popular in the horror community. I've never liked the Phantasm movies, quite frankly, but, after 3 movies that I enjoyed watching, I didn't mind ending it with Phantasm. I think they also they made a mistake on my bill that day, but they ended up taking it off, and it was fine. So no major complaints there. But ultimately, 2019 was a great experience. Oh, plus they gave us like a free poster-sized poster, not movie theater-sized poster, but still a fair-sized poster that had the Dismember logo for that year, and then it had the 4 movies they showed. And I know other locations had the same poster, and then they swapped them for the different movies, because every location had slightly different movies. Sometimes there'd be a couple movies that would overlap. Sometimes they were a completely different set list whatsoever. So each Alamo location got a different playlist. So that was always fun to go on Twitter and see what everybody else got, kind of thing. So that was in 2019. And then in 2020, obviously, COVID happened. And so theaters were shut down for a while. They did reopen in October in my state, and they reopened in September in some other states. I remember in September I had to cross state lines to go see Unhinged, Tenet, and New Mutants. But by October, it was reopened. But because of COVID, and this was before any of the vaccines were available, they decided not to do a Dismember marathon because, in the middle of a plague, you're not going to get people together in the same room for 8 hours, even with masks. So what they did was sort of a skewed version of it called Dismembering the Alamo, where they had a single mystery screening for all of the 4 weeks of that month. And then I went to 2 of those. I went to the first and the second. I did not go to the third or the fourth. I believe I was out of state for some of that. The first Dismember the Alamo movie, Dismembering the Alamo, rather, I believe that was the first movie I saw at Alamo after it reopened from the COVID closure, and that ended up being Psycho Goreman, which was one of my favorite movies of that year. It was just a great time. There was no host to introduce the movie. It's just they started playing the mystery movie and you found out what it was. So I really liked Psycho Goreman. There weren't too many people in the theater that first week. There were more in the second week, and that movie was Lucio Fulci's Enigma, or something like that, which is sort of this Italian Carrie Suspiria type ripoff movie, which was fun. It was fun to see that on the big screen. I enjoyed the Fulci goodness there. I did not go to movies 3 or 4, but I do know that they were the original Nosferatu and The Dark and the Wicked, respectively. Nosferatu, obviously, it's a classic. And they show Nosferatu in the theater with like a live musical accompaniment almost annually at my Alamo. I think they even did it this year, but I did not attend because I'd recently seen the original Nosferatu on the last drive-in, so it was still pretty fresh in my memory. The Dark and the Wicked, I eventually saw that on Shudder. I wasn't too crazy about it. I'm not too crazy about the guy who made that movie anyway. I think it's the same guy who made The Strangers, and I fucking hate The Strangers. And then last year, 2021, my Alamo did not get this at all, but they had a sort of a shortened, it was only a Dismember double feature, where they only showed 2 movies, and I believe the 2 movies were the same for every location. They ended up being Boarding House, which was one of the first shot-on-video movies, but it was transferred from video to 35 and actually showed in theaters. And then Bubba Hotep, which is another movie from Don Coscarelli, the guy who made Phantasm. I like Bubba Hotep. I'm not a huge fan of it. I think it's... I think it's okay. I think goodwill for Bruce Campbell carries that movie pretty far, but I don't think the movie's that good. I'm not a big Don Coscarelli fan. I mean, Beastmaster, Phantasm. I'm just John dies at the end. I'm generally not a fan of his work, to be quite honest. But I'm sure he's a nice guy, though. I mean, I have no problems with him personally. I just haven't really liked the work he's put out. So this year, 2022. Was the first year that the full-on marathon was coming back, and when the tickets went on sale, I was so excited. I think I may have been the first person to buy a ticket for it. I think when I was looking at the seat selection, I was the first person who bought the ticket. And the ticket, it's for a movie, so it's obviously a bit more expensive. I think it's like $35 or something, which for 4 movies, isn't that bad. But I want to say that this year's Dismember the Alamo was a big disappointment compared to 2019, both in the bells and whistles that were involved, which were minimal, and the movie selection. I will say I did share my an abbreviated version of my opinion to Twitter, and Skip from AV Geeks replied, and he basically said, part of the reason that this was so not as good was sort of twofold. One is that I guess Alamo did not pay for any of the little tchotchkes and everything that they hand out, or the prizes for that matter. I guess they had to pay for those out of pocket, which is odd. I didn't win any prizes, but I believe the prizes themselves were AGFA DVDs or AGFA Blu-rays, and since AGFA is a sponsor of this, you'd think they would have supplied those. And then the movie selection was not up to them this year, because apparently in previous years, the programming was left up to different local programmers. So I'm assuming that, for instance, in 2019, Josh from Lunchmeat and Skip probably had a hand in choosing those movies and, getting a 35 print of Fibes, which AGFA may have had that print. I don't know where they went to it, but it was probably from AGFA. And all of that. Because when I looked at, after 2019, when I went to Twitter and I saw all of the different types of lineups, they were sometimes very different. I think Centipede Horror was pretty common among all of them, I think because it was probably a brand new DCP pile for that. I think that was like brand new for AGFA to have in their theatrical catalog. But I don't think Fibes was anywhere else. I think Rabid may have made a couple other appearances as well. So when I looked at this year, not every location was the same. I know a couple locations got this Japanese horror movie from the 1960s that's in black and white. And there was one location, I think it was a location in Texas, that had a really good lineup. They had a 35mm print of the original Evil Dead. I mean, what the fuck going to show it that one here? But otherwise, I was seeing that the movies that we got here at my location were almost identical through many of the other locations. The only thing that really changed was the order they showed them in. But let's talk about the movies themselves and why that was sort of a disappointment. So the first movie was a movie called Uninvited. It's a movie I own on Blu-ray, but I've never actually watched it. I've just had it. It's because it was released through Vinegar Syndrome, which is going to be a common thread here. And I also have the Vinegar Syndrome had sold like mini slipcovers that had like a pin in them, so I have a pin of the movie Uninvited that says, like, cats only have 9 lives, you only have 1. And it's hanging on my little mannequin that has the denim vest that I put all my collectible pins on. I'd been meaning to watch it. I just kind of never got around to it, even though I own it. So I was actually seeing it for the first time. And it's actually a very funny movie. It was probably the highlight of the entire marathon was that first movie, which is unfortunate that you start off on your highest note. But it's a very funny movie. I don't know if the humor is all unintentional, but if so, it definitely fits that so bad it's good vibe with some crazy-ass practical effects and this sound effect of a cat meowing even when the cat's not opening its mouth, because it's about like this mutant cat that lives in like the body of another cat and escapes from a lab and it starts killing people on a yacht. It's a silly movie, and it's very funny, and I enjoyed watching it in a theater with the crowd. The second movie is what really kind of brought the vibe down, because it's not really a movie. It was the AGFA horror trailer show Video Rage, which is an extra on the AGFA horror trailer show Blu-ray. Now, I did see the actual AGFA horror trailer show in theaters at Alamo. They premiered a 35mm print of it that AGFA struck on Film Reel Day, which is March 15th, I believe. But I bought a ticket to that knowing I was seeing a trailer compilation that was fun and on 35, so I knew what I was getting into. This was a 70-something minute compilation of trailers for shot-on-video movies. Many of them fun and terrible. And I've seen it before as an extra on that Blu-ray, and as a Blu-ray extra, it's perfectly fine. It's perfectly fun. But as one of 4 movies that were promised for a mystery selection to not actually be a movie, it wasn't that good. And now, in fairness to the organizers of the event, they did put a game with this. It was like a bingo where you had different squares that mentioned something that you'd see in a trailer, so that you could win a prize. Unfortunately, I think they ran out of prizes like 10 minutes into this thing with only a couple trailers being shown. And now that makes sense if, they had to pay for the prizes out of pocket, which sucks, quite frankly. I'm not sure why Alamo couldn't fit that bill. But yeah, to have this this bingo game and have all of the prizes and the winners run out after like 10 minutes. So I'm like, all right, well, at least that was like an extra component to make me enjoy something I'd already seen before. It's something that's not even a full movie more. But then, the people got bingo too fast. Actually, who knows? Maybe they didn't even check the bingos. I don't know how rigorous they were with that. So that was kind of lame, and that's like a 74-minute thing, whatever. And then the third movie was Cemetery of Terror. It's a Spanish horror movie that Vinegar Syndrome also released. I own it because it came with one of my, I believe, last year's Vinegar Syndrome halfway subscription. The movie sucks. I just don't like it. I know a lot of people like that, just like they like his other movies. And I like Don't Panic, which is from the same director. But the Cemetery of Terror just kind of sucks. It's like a weird, kid-friendly, almost Halloween, Evil Dead ripoff. I just don't find it particularly fun, and I don't enjoy it. And I'd seen it before, so that was a slog to get through. And then after that, the last movie was Flesh Eater, which I also own from Vinegar Syndrome. So basically, 3 of these 4 movies are available on Vinegar Syndrome Blu-rays. And one of them is on an in-AGFA Blu-ray, which, I understand it's easier to license things from AGFA because, AGFA was originally founded by the former CEO of Alamo, Tim League, and it's a non-profit and everything, so it's really easy to license that. I wish there was more 35mm, because if it's a movie I already own on Blu-ray, then the DCP file is essentially a glorified Blu-ray that you're watching in the theater for a movie I've already seen. And I mean, if it were a movie I've already seen and that movie is Cronenberg's Rabid, I have less of a complaint about that, because that's, I'm not going to say Rabid is a classic, but it's still vintage Cronenberg. So seeing that on the big screen is much more impressive than seeing Cemetery of Terror. But Flesh Eater is a good movie. I think it's good. I think I have a more positive opinion of Flesh Eater than other people. I just find it very funny, and how a lot of the movie seems to be an excuse for the guy who played the main zombie at the beginning of Night of the Living Dead to rip women's shirts off and expose their breasts. It doesn't have a sleazy feel, but it does have I'm going to show these boobs and you can't stop me, but also has some really good gore effects and has some funny acting and everything. So I enjoyed seeing that with a crowd that was laughing, because I genuinely enjoy that movie. So basically, I like the first movie, which I hadn't seen before, even though I own it. And I like the last movie, which I had seen before, because I got to enjoy it with a crowd. But the middle, that trailer compilation, and the Cemetery of Terror, that was kind of a bust. So not as successful there. As far as the bells and whistles, that was also disappointing. There was no costume contest this year. There were a couple people that were dressed up. There was someone sitting in front of me who was dressed like Pennywise, and I think they came with someone who was dressed like, I think maybe a penguin or something. And there were like 4 guys who were dressed up like Persian rugs. They had like these weird like jumpsuits with like silver tigers and everything on them. I don't know what they were supposed to be. I'm sure they were dressed as something, but they seemed to be having fun. So not a lot of people dressed up anyway, but there was not anything of that nature. Also, they just ran the movies back to back. They didn't make us like leave the theater and come back or anything. So if you wanted to run to the bathroom, you basically had to run during the credits to a movie, or just as the next movie began, or while the MC, who in this case was Skip, was going through his little spiel introducing the movie and all that stuff. So that felt very rushed. And apparently they had a screening of the Rocky Horror Picture Show that was beginning after Dismember was done. So I think part of it was also trying to rush us out to get Rocky Horror in, which that kind of sucked. I mean, for one thing, no disrespect to Rocky Horror. I love Rocky Horror. I've seen it performed live with shadow casting and stuff numerous times in the past. I love Rocky Horror. For one thing, though, Rocky Horror, I understand that most theaters aren't going to do this anymore, but Rocky Horror really should just be shown at midnight. But if they show it at 7 or 8 or 9, I mean, there's plenty of other theaters that play it earlier so that more people can attend, because not everybody can go to a midnight show that is going to end at 2 a.m. I understand that. So it still did seem pretty rushed, especially because I believe Dismember was sold out. In fact, I think there was an issue where they mentioned something about the third row of the theater being double booked, so I think they may have actually sold more seats than they had. Maybe a weird glitch on Alamo's app or website, so that would have sucked, because I generally sit in the second row. That's my favorite row to sit in at Alamo. But it's just, you had people who were waiting 3 years for this, and it's basically get them in and get them out like sausage. As far as the little tchotchkes, they gave us all of the tchotchkes all right at the beginning in a little bag. So there definitely weren't as many as 2019, and that certainly makes sense if the tchotchkes were also not paid for by Alamo and the MCs had to pay for it out of budget, that out of their own pocket. That really sucks. So there was 1 or 2 tchotchkes per movie. And the tchotchkes are the tchotchkes. They're not supposed to be anything extravagant. They weren't in 2019, and they weren't this year. But having them all in the bag at the same time, even though it said no peeking on it, it still meant that people could look in and get more of a hint and sort of ruin the surprise. There was an older dude sitting next to me to my left who just emptied everything out, and he was sitting there before I was, and I almost always get to these things half an hour early for the pre-show anyway. So that was kind of lousy. I didn't peek in mine. If I had peeked in mine, I would have seen the bingo card, which explicitly told me about that trailer compilation, which would have brought my mood down probably. So I'm glad I didn't look at that, I guess. But the lack of the contests and the smaller amount of tchotchkes and everything, and the rushing us in and out and not taking a bathroom break to do that, it just didn't have. I saw some people on Twitter saying that previous years had a party atmosphere and this one did not, and I agree with that. And I know this isn't completely limited to my location. When I was looking through Twitter, it seemed that aside from that Texas location that showed the 35mm Evil Dead print, because apparently they had fun, they even had different shorts that were shown between the movie, and they had costume contests. So some other locations did go a little bit more all out than my location did. But a lot of other locations, a lot of the other things I was hearing from people who either had a similar lineup to my theater, or maybe one movie was different, or just the order was different, they were very disappointed. It seemed like universally people who have gone to this event before thought that this was sort of the worst one in recent memory, which sucks. I mean, and I can blame some of this, I think, on Alamo corporate, especially if the local organizers who were emceeing and helping out were not allowed to curate the playlist. I mean, that sucks, because that curator is going to know what kind of stuff the local market likes. And this is probably post-COVID. I mean, we're still in COVID, but let's say post-COVID shutdown and post-Alamo's bankruptcy, which I believe they're out of now. Alamo hasn't quite felt the same. Part of that is a lot of those special events they don't have anymore. Video Vortex Fridays, where they'd have a 10 o'clock show that you only pay $1 for and see some shot on video trash piece. They don't do that anymore. Terror Tuesdays and Weird Wednesdays they're not really doing. They're just kind of randomly doing special screenings of old horror movies sometimes. But it's not on a regimented weekly basis anymore. The Victory program has been paused since COVID. I mean, they brought back Season Pass, but I haven't resubbed for some of the issues I've had with Alamo since they've reopened. But the rewards program, I mean, at this point, I think I have 3 free birthday movies I should be able to cash in whenever they re-up that. Plus, God knows how many. I probably have a bunch of free shit because of all the points I've racked up in the last 3 years. But it seems like Alamo corporate just did not allow this to be as fun. And also, they didn't print a shirt for this one. They did print a patch for it. But apparently FedEx, and you all know my complaints with FedEx from the Vinegar Syndrome unboxings, FedEx was delayed, so the patches didn't get there in time for the screening. In fairness, Skip did offer that if you wanted to leave your email address with him, he would let you know when the patches came in, so you could get one. I don't have anywhere to put patches, so I frankly just didn't bother, even though I have 2 patches from 2019. So I didn't bother, but if you're one of the people who is hardcore about collecting the patches every year, I can see how that would be upsetting. So there was just so much less about this one. And it seems like it wasn't just my location that was rushing people in and out. It wasn't just my location that did this. So this seems to be... this is the shit runs downhill. I think all of the problems or all of the issues that made this Dismember the Alamo underwhelming came from Alamo corporate as opposed to anyone at the local level. So I do feel bad for Skip and any of the local programmers or any of the other franchise locations where people felt like me that it was an underwhelming experience, because it seems like they had no control over that. They were told exactly what they had to play. I guess they scheduled screenings in the same theater after. So yeah, like it was 8 hours in 2019. This one came out to a little under 6.5 because they were just rushing through it and there was no like fun stuff between the screenings or anything. So that was shitty. I also feel bad because, I mean, the servers who work that Dismember marathon, they're basically a wait staff that has to be attentive to the same screening for 6 straight hours, and running in food and beverage and picking up your order cards and everything. So I left what I thought was a generous tip for my servers and runners because I just felt that they deserved it for what they did. Plus, I ordered 2 food products and a drink, and normally when I go to Alamo these days, all I get is my free club soda. I usually don't even order food unless I'm like super starving. I couldn't eat anything beforehand. So since I was going to be there all day, I decided I was going to obviously actually order some of the food. So I got my chicken tenders, which are overpriced and they only give you 3 of them. And my Alamo still hasn't brought back the hot wings that I liked from pre-COVID. And who knows if they ever will. And I ordered my favorite cocktail there, Ranch on the Rainwater, which is basically their version of a ranch water. And it has some like spicy stuff in it, and it's good. And then I got hungry around movie 3, and I figured if I don't like Cemetery of Terror, at least I can stuff my face with popcorn and enjoy that. So I got a bowl of popcorn. So it was definitely the most money I've spent on concessions at Alamo in a while. But I just hope that maybe next year it can go back to, if they have it next year, I assume they will, that it can go back to the glory of 2019. And from what I hear from people who have been to Dismember years prior, I don't know if my location has, because my location hasn't been open too long. I think maybe a little over 5 years. Actually, it may be closer to 6 now. 5 or 6, basically. I don't know if they had Dismember in like 2018 when they were open and I didn't know that it existed. But from the other locations that existed earlier, I know that Dismember is a big fucking deal, and I hope they can return to more of that party atmosphere, more tchotchkes, more prizes, costume contests, more fun stuff between the movies, the taking the breaks and everything, not feeling rushed. And and overall, I mean, it comes down to the movies and just a better movie selection. I mean, if you want to show So Bad It's Good Vinegar Syndrome movie or Severin movie, perfectly fine to do 1 or even 2 of those, but they should probably break that up with something that's a little bit more either popular or a legitimately good hidden gem. It doesn't have to be a modern movie. It can certainly be some sort of 80s or 90s classic. Just like, Phantasm is pretty well known. Rabid is maybe not as well known unless you're a big Cronenberg fan. Fibes is a bit more of a deep cut, but not super deep. And Centipede Horror, rather, that fits more into that So Bad It's Good sort of wacky aesthetic. But I do know some other locations played some better stuff. I mean, as far as like shot on video So Bad It's Good stuff, I know one of the locations showed Ozone, which is a movie I own on Blu-ray, and Ozone's a pretty fun movie. In my opinion, it's actually one of the most enjoyable shot-on-video movies of the 90s era. Ozone's a really fun movie. I would have loved Ozone, or even some of the other Video Vortex movies that they used to show back when they had that. Killing Spree, Blood Lake, that stuff's really fun to see with a crowd. Kickboxer from Hell, not as much, but they could have even shown something like that. So it's, I found it disappointing because it just had less bells and whistles, and the movie selection wasn't as good, and it seemed like Alamo corporate kept everyone's hands tied, and that if some of the local organizers had their way, they would have preferred that it be a better experience with better movies and more prizes and more interesting stuff, but they just couldn't get to that. Oh, and some of the other, I should mention, aside from the bingo, every other prize was random, where we all got tchotchkes in our bags. Like, so there was like a little hand puppet or a little cat and a little zombie figurine or whatever, and it'd be like, hey, if the zombie figurine in your bag had blue pants painted, or the little hand, if it had its fingernails painted, you get the prize. It was basically, if you had a variant that was randomly put in your goodie bag, or baddie bag as they called, you won the prize. So it wasn't that you did anything to earn it, it's just you were luck of the draw of the 100 or so seats that this auditorium fits. Because it was in one of their bigger auditoriums. They put it in Auditorium 1. I believe 1, 6, and 5 are their biggest, and they have like in the 90s or 100s as far as how many seats they fit. I think some of the smaller ones are closer to like 50. I actually should remember this, because back when I was going to get married at Alamo, we had booked one of the smaller auditoriums, Auditorium 9, to get married in. That's kind of sad to remember now that I'm single. It's fine. I'm doing okay. It sucks, but I'm doing okay. I promise I won't mention my breakup in every fucking video I make. So I just wanted to share that, because I've talked about Dismember the Alamo and Dismembering the Alamo in previous videos. So I just wanted to say, I mean, after 3 years where I was super excited and hyped for them to bring it back to be, it wasn't a bad experience. I enjoyed Uninvited, and I enjoyed Flesh Eater with a Crowd. But it was disappointing and underwhelming. So, hopefully, 2023, maybe the corporate office will loosen the noose a little bit and let them have a bit more freedom. But if not, then, I mean, there's nothing we can do. I mean, if next year is disappointing, then I probably won't do this again. I'll just vicariously live through people, or I'll find some other theater that does other stuff. Because the night before Dismember rather, I went to the Regal to see the 3D re-release of the original Dawn of the Dead, because the OG 78 Dawn of the Dead is my favorite classic horror movie of all time. And I've never seen it in a theater, so to see that in a theater with the 3D conversion, which, the 3D conversion wasn't great, but it wasn't bad either. It worked in a couple things, a couple of the specific scenes. But just seeing it on the big screen with a crowd was great, so that was a good experience. And then, later on Halloween weekend, and Sunday I had a guest over, and I showed them a Serbian film. And anytime I show somebody new in my life a Serbian film and they don't immediately run away from me, it's usually a good sign. And then I showed them The Room, Tommy Wiseau's The Room, as a palate cleanser after, and they seem to very much enjoy that. So that was a fun experience to show a new friend those two movies. And then Monday I took the day off of work just so I could just kind of chill and just enjoy Halloween. And, I watched a new movie I hadn't seen before on Shudder, and I watched my 4K UHD that I just bought a Fright Night, and had a nice little day to myself. So the entire Halloween weekend by no means was a bust at all. I still had fun all weekend. It's just that I thought Dismember was going to be the highlight, and it ended up being one of the lowlights of the weekend. But still, I mean, I want to make it clear that I do not blame or harbor any animosity toward Skip or any of the people who were working at my local Alamo to bring this event. None of that's their fault. I don't even think scheduling Rocky Horror at the time and the screen they put it on was their fault. That was also probably a decision from corporate. I used to manage a Regal movie theater, so I know that you have very little freedom as far as what auditoriums you can place movies in and what showtimes you can schedule movies for. That was all done in the corporate office in Knoxville, Tennessee. The managers, associate or general, had very little freedom about that. So I don't think that was my local Alamo's problem either, or my local fault rather. I put all of the blame on corporate, and maybe it's that they don't care about this event anymore post the bankruptcy and post COVID. Maybe it's not. Maybe the culture has just changed to Alamo, where they're not as big on these special movie events anymore. I mean, it was kind of downhill when they changed the "Don't Talk and Text" PSA, and they changed it from that booming voice that was like very insistent you don't do it to this friendly female voice that was like, "Please do not disturb the movie for anybody. Be excellent to each other." It's like, no, I want a PSA that's like, if you talk during this movie, I'm taking you out back and shooting you in the fucking head. That's the kind of PSA I want. Don't fucking talk and text. So, I don't know. I just wanted to share my little thoughts about that. Let's see. It's November 1st now. Yeah, I don't have much else to talk about right now. I have no major plans this month. I might have some plans at the later part of the month, but that's not solidified yet. But otherwise, nothing too terribly exciting for me to talk about. So until next time, thank you for listening to my rambling and or bitching about Dismember the Alamo 2022 being pretty disappointing. And I hope you have a good rest of your day wherever you are. Thanks, everybody.